You've already met the person you refuse to become. It happened in moments you don't talk about, a thought that moved through you with absolute clarity, and then vanished the second you recognized what it meant. An impulse so direct it had no justification attached, a kind of force that didn't ask permission. You saw it, and you made sure no one else did. The version of yourself that exists now, the one you present, the one you defend, was built to replace that. It's functional. It's tolerable. It keeps things stable. But it's not what you are, it's what you've agreed to be instead. That other self didn't disappear. You just stopped letting it surface. And every day you maintain this arrangement, it gets harder to pretend you don't know what you're doing. The fatigue you carry isn't from effort. It's from suppression. You're not exhausted because life is difficult. You're exhausted because you're spending all your energy keeping something locked down. And what's locked down isn't weakness. It's the exact opposite. What you fear isn't collapse. What you fear is what would happen if you stopped performing, if you let that thing out, if you became what you actually are instead of what you've trained yourself to be. The self you perform didn't appear by accident. It was trained into you through a series of transactions you never consciously agreed to. You learned early that certain expressions of yourself were rewarded. Others were met with silence, rejection, disapproval. And so you adjusted, you became watchful. You started scanning for what was acceptable before you acted, before you spoke, before you even allowed yourself to feel. This wasn't weakness, it was adaptation, survival even. Because the alternative, being cast out, being alone, being unloved, felt unbearable. So you made the trade. You gave up parts of yourself in exchange for belonging. Morality became the language of that trade. You learned that good meant controllable, that virtue meant fitting in, that self-discipline was just another word for fear that had been given a respectable name: kindness, humility, patience. These weren't values you chose. They were strategies, ways to ensure you wouldn't be rejected, ways to prove you were safe, that you wouldn't threaten the order, that you could be trusted to stay small. And the parts of you that couldn't be made small, the aggression, the ambition, the raw wanting, those got reframed as flaws, as things to overcome, as proof that you still had work to do on yourself. So you did the work. You became controlled, moderate, reasonable. You turned your own force against itself and called it growth, and everyone around you agreed. They rewarded you for it. They told you this was maturity. But maturity in this case just meant you'd learned how to hide what couldn't be accepted. Nietzsche didn't write to help you understand yourself. He wrote to destroy the lies you've been using to avoid yourself. His work wasn't philosophy in the academic sense. It was demolition, a systematic dismantling of every comfortable narrative you've built around why you are the way you are. He wasn't interested in making you feel better. He was interested in making you see what you've been refusing to see. When he talked about morality, he wasn't talking about right and wrong. He was talking about control, about how entire systems of value get constructed, not to guide human beings toward truth, but to domesticate them, to make them manageable, to ensure that the dangerous parts, the parts that want, that take, that refuse to apologize, get labeled as sickness, as sin, as something to be cured. Morality, in his view, was a technology, a tool used by the weak to suppress the strong, and more importantly, a tool the strong learn to use against themselves. This is where it gets uncomfortable. You've spent your entire life believing that your self-control is a virtue, that your restraint makes you good, that the fact you don't act on every impulse is proof of your character. And Nietzsche comes along and asks a single question: what if that's just fear? What if everything you call discipline is just a sophisticated form of cowardice? What if the reason you don't become what you could become isn't because you're moral? It's because you're terrified of what that would cost you. He called it ressentiment, a uniquely toxic form of self-hatred that emerges when you can't express your own power. So instead, you villainize power itself. You tell yourself that ambition is greed, that confidence is arrogance, that wanting more is shallow. And in doing so, you don't just suppress those qualities in yourself, you morally condemn them. You turn your inability to act into a virtue, your weakness into righteousness. And the worst part, you actually believe it. You've convinced yourself that you're choosing to be this way, that it's a reflection of your values, when really it's just a reflection of your fear. There's a version of you that you've spent years making sure never fully emerges. It's not hidden because it's wrong. It's hidden because it's incompatible with the life you've agreed to live. This version doesn't apologize. It doesn't second-guess itself. It doesn't pause to make sure everyone else is comfortable before it moves. It exists with a kind of clarity that has no room for negotiation, and the moment you feel it start to surface, you shut it down. You've trained yourself to do this so automatically that you barely notice it happening anymore. This other self has wants that don't care about fairness. It has ambitions that aren't humble. It looks at power and doesn't flinch. It doesn't pretend that wanting influence is the same as being corrupt. It doesn't dress up desire in acceptable language. It sees what it wants and moves toward it without needing permission from anyone, including you. And that's the problem. The second you let it out, the second you stop managing it, your entire social framework collapses. The people who know you as calm, as reasonable, as someone who doesn't make waves, they wouldn't recognize this. And you know that. So you keep it buried. But it's not just ambition. There's an edge to you that you've learned to suppress, a capacity for aggression that has nothing to do with anger and everything to do with force, the ability to say no without explaining yourself, the ability to take up space without shrinking to make room for someone else's comfort, the ability to prioritize yourself without performing guilt afterward. You've been told your whole life that these things make you selfish, that they make you dangerous, that good people don't operate this way, and so you've made sure that you don't operate this way either. You've turned that force inward. You've used it to police yourself, to make sure you never become the kind of person you were taught to fear. And now you live in a strange kind of paralysis. You have the capacity for something far greater than what you're doing. You know this. You feel it every time you hold yourself back, every time you soften your position to avoid conflict, every time you let someone else take credit because claiming it for yourself would feel too aggressive, every time you dismiss your own desires as unrealistic, too much, inappropriate. You've convinced yourself that this restraint is maturity, that it's wisdom, but it's not. It's just fear wearing a respectable mask. And the self you're afraid of becoming? It's not a monster, it's just the version of you that refuses to keep pretending. What dies first is the ability to want anything cleanly. Desire becomes complicated. Every impulse gets filtered through a series of justifications before you allow yourself to feel it. You can't want something simply because you want it. You need a reason, a moral framework, proof that it's not selfish, not excessive, not the kind of thing that would make you into someone you've spent your life condemning. And so, wanting itself becomes exhausting. You stop reaching for things. You stop imagining a different kind of life. You settle into the one you have and tell yourself it's enough, that wanting more would be immature, unrealistic, a sign you haven't learned to be grateful. But underneath that resignation, something else is building. A kind of pressure that has nowhere to go. You've locked down the parts of yourself that wanted to expand, to take up space, to assert force in the world. And that energy doesn't just evaporate, it turns inward. It becomes self-attack. You start holding yourself to impossible standards, criticizing yourself for not being more disciplined, most productive, more controlled. You become your own warden, and the worst part is, you believe this is personal growth. You think the harshness is making you better, when really it's just punishing you for being alive. Your relationships begin to feel like performances. You're no longer present in them. You're managing them, calculating what you need to say to keep things smooth, what you need to hide to avoid conflict, what version of yourself you need to present so no one asks uncomfortable questions. Intimacy becomes impossible, even when you're physically close to someone. You've spent so long suppressing the parts of yourself that are raw, uncontrolled, difficult, that there's nothing left to actually share. You're just a set of behaviors, a script you've memorized, and the people around you can feel it, even if they don't say anything. They sense the distance, the withholding, the fact that you're not actually there. And then there's the thinking. It becomes relentless, obsessive. You replay conversations. You dissect your own decisions. You search for the optimal way to handle situations that don't even exist yet. It feels like analysis. Like you're being thorough, careful, strategic. But it's not that. It's paralysis dressed up as intelligence. You've suppressed your ability to act on instinct, on gut feeling, on the kind of immediate knowing that doesn't need to be thought through. And now every decision requires endless deliberation. You've traded spontaneity for safety. And what you've gotten in return is a mind that never stops interrogating itself. Eventually, the world starts to feel smaller. You stop encountering anything that surprises you. Everything becomes predictable, manageable, contained. And you tell yourself this is stability, that you've finally figured out how to live without chaos. But stability without aliveness is just stagnation. You've built a life where nothing can hurt you, and nothing can reach you either. You've become unreachable, not as protection from others, as protection from yourself. If this feels uncomfortably precise, then this channel is probably not here to entertain you. It exists to keep exposing what most people spend their lives avoiding. Subscribe if you're willing to see more. Every quality you've learned to call a virtue might just be fear that's been given a better name. Self-control, restraint, humility, patience. These aren't inherently good. They're just socially rewarded forms of suppression. And you've spent so long performing them that you've forgotten they were ever a choice. You think this is who you are, that your careful, measured, controlled existence is a reflection of maturity, of wisdom, of having learned how to live properly. But what if it's not? What if everything you call growth is just a more sophisticated way of staying small? Nietzsche saw this clearly. He wasn't interested in whether you were a good person. He was interested in whether you were a alive person. And for him, aliveness meant something very specific. It meant the ability to affirm your own force without needing external validation. To move through the world with your own direction, your own values, your own sense of what matters, regardless of whether anyone else agrees. He called this the will to power. And it has nothing to do with dominating others. It's about refusing to be dominated, refusing to let your life be shaped entirely by what other people need you to be. But you've been taught the opposite. You've been taught that power is dangerous, that wanting it makes you corrupt, that the people who seek it are morally compromised. And so you've done the only thing that made sense. You've turned against your own strength. You've made it shameful to want more, shameful to take up space, shameful to prioritize yourself. And in doing so, you've created a life where the only acceptable way to exist is to remain harmless, inoffensive, manageable. A life where your worth is measured by how little disruption you cause. This is the trap. You think you're being good. You think you're being responsible. You think the fact that you don't act on every impulse that you consider others, that you restrain yourself, makes you a better person than those who don't. And maybe by conventional standards it does. But conventional standards were designed to keep you controllable. They were designed to make sure that the parts of you that could actually threaten the order, the ambition, the hunger, the refusal to settle, never fully emerge. And you've internalized that so deeply that you police yourself more effectively than anyone else ever could. The exhaustion you feel isn't from living a difficult life. It's from living against yourself. From spending every day managing, suppressing, constraining the parts of you that want to expand. You've turned your own force into your enemy. And then you've called that maturity. You've called it self-awareness. You've called it emotional intelligence. But it's none of those things. It's just a very polished form of self-betrayal. And the reason you can't admit that is because admitting it would mean everything you've built your identity around, your control, your discipline, your moral superiority, was just cowardice dressed up as virtue. Nietzsche wouldn't judge you for what you feel. He'd judge you for what you refuse to become, for the life you had the capacity to live but didn't, for the force you buried to stay safe, for the years you spent pretending that suppression was the same as growth. Becoming what you've been avoiding doesn't fix anything. It doesn't bring peace. It doesn't resolve the tension. It doesn't make your life easier or more comfortable. In fact, it does the opposite. It introduces conflict where there was none. It forces you into positions you can't defend with the logic you've been using to justify your existence. It strips away the carefully constructed explanations you've given yourself for why you are the way you are. And it leaves you exposed in ways you've spent your entire life trying to avoid. The people in your life won't understand. They'll see the shift and interpret it as damage, as a breakdown, as you becoming someone worse than you were. They'll tell you you've changed, and they'll mean it as a warning, as evidence that you're going in the wrong direction. And in some ways, they'll be right. You will have changed. You will have become incompatible with the version of yourself they needed you to be. And that incompatibility will cost you. Relationships you thought were solid will fracture. Connections you believed were deep will reveal themselves as conditional. People will leave, and you won't be able to stop them. You'll lose the comfort of your old identity, the one that was predictable, the one that knew how to navigate social situations without causing disturbance. The one that could be relied on to stay calm, to stay reasonable, to not make things uncomfortable. That version of you served a function. It kept things stable. It made you easy to be around. And once it's gone, you won't have anything to replace it with except the raw, unmanaged thing underneath. And that thing doesn't know how to perform. It doesn't know how to soften itself to make others comfortable. It just exists. And existence without performance feels brutal, feels wrong. Feels like you've lost control. There will be moments where you question whether any of this was worth it, where you look at what you've lost, the acceptance, the stability, the sense of being understood, and wonder if you made a mistake. If maybe the suppressed version of your life was better than this, if maybe safety was worth the cost, and you won't have a clean answer to that. You'll just have the reality of what you've chosen. And the reality is that you can't go back. Once you've seen what you've been refusing, once you've let it surface, you can't unsee it. You can't return to the controlled, managed version of yourself and believe in it the way you used to. It's been exposed as a construction, and constructions, once recognized, lose their power. Nietzsche didn't offer solutions. He didn't believe in them. He believed in confrontation, in looking directly at what you are and refusing to apologize for it, in living according to your own force instead of the values handed to you by people who needed you to stay weak. And that path doesn't lead to happiness. It doesn't lead to belonging. It leads to isolation, to conflict, to a kind of existence that most people will find threatening. And you'll have to carry that. You'll have to accept that becoming what you actually are means losing the right to be comfortable, losing the right to blend in, losing the right to be understood by people who are still operating within the framework you've abandoned. This isn't a transformation that makes you better. It's a transformation that makes you honest. And honesty, in a world built on performance, is unbearable. You can't claim ignorance anymore. You know what you're refusing. You know why you're refusing it. You know the cost of continuing to live this way. And you know that the life you've built, the controlled, acceptable, carefully managed version, is just a long, slow act of evasion. What happens next isn't up to insight. It's not about understanding more. You already understand. The question now is whether you're willing to act on what you know. Whether you're willing to let that other self, the one you've kept buried, finally surface. Whether you're willing to accept what that will cost you. The alternative is to stay exactly where you are, to continue performing, to keep justifying the suppression as if it were a form of enlightenment. No one will intervene. No one will force you to change. The world is perfectly fine with you remaining manageable. What you'll lose isn't visible from the outside, it's internal, a slow depletion that only you will feel. And by the time you recognize it fully, you'll have spent decades maintaining a version of yourself that was never real. The self you've been avoiding is still there. It hasn't left. It's just waiting. After this, the problem isn't ignorance, it's choice.